from my end, hello, welcome all to this Techruption deep dive that will be hosted by Mark of the BIS Institute. There's Mark. Yeah, my name is Peter Kusters, for the people that don't know me. I'm responsible for the Techruption program, which is an innovation program that we run on the campus in Heerlen, the Brightlands Smart Services campus, and where we help, let's say, the somewhat bigger organizations, corporates, but also bigger SMEs, governmental institutions, and knowledge institutes to come together and co-create smart services. So everything related to data and digital tech, you can find with us. So we do things on artificial intelligence, AR, VR, blockchain, MPC, and a wide range of other difficult terms. Today we'll focus on something that belongs to the bucket of artificial intelligence, if I'm not mistaken, Mark, and it's about data-driven personalization. Sorry. For the people who are a little bit new to MS Teams, Mark already shared his screen, and you can switch between presenter mode and shared screen mode by just pressing the specific button on the bottom side of your screen. So there you can just click the presenter or click the slides, and that will pop up on the big screen. The rest will go down. I'll unmute some of the new people. I have to say this session will be recorded for privacy reasons. I need to tell you that. And if it's a success, we'll also put it online for the people who are not able to visit this live event today. If there are any questions or other things that you would like to say, you can use the comment section. We'll keep a slight eye onto that. And Mark probably 1 or 2 times during his presentation will look at your questions or comments, and we'll try to answer them. That leaves me with giving the floor to you, Mark. Lots of success, and looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. I'm also looking forward to it. So also on my behalf, welcome to this session. Glad to see so many people interested in this. I have a couple of remarks. I mean, Peter already mentioned them really briefly, but I would really appreciate it if you could mute your mic when you're not talking. Keep your camera on so that I can also see what you guys are doing. And as Peter mentioned, use the chat function to ask the questions. And I think that if we stick to those rules, it will be quite an enjoyable session. So yeah, welcome. I will be talking for the next hour about what I think is the future of data-driven personalization. Let's just get to it. Maybe first to introduce myself. Wait, I am so you know who is talking to you. What is going on? Why is my slides not going to the next slide?
Mark, I have a quick question up front.
Yes.
I'm not allowed to use the chat function.
You are not allowed to use the chat function?
No.
All right.
For people, you need to be a member of the team, and they can only chat.
Danny will dive into it.
Maybe later, but
in a few minutes.
Okay.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks, Danny. Okay. Yeah. It'll probably be sorted. If it isn't, just like Danny, interrupt me. I'll be happy to answer your questions. So maybe just to introduce myself so that you know who's talking to you. I'm Mark Graus. I'm an assistant professor in data-driven personalization. I work in Maastricht University and the BIS Research Institute in Heerlen, and I study data-driven personalization. So basically what I do is I rely on big data. I use big data to make inferences about what people want, what the interests are, what the preferences are, and I use this knowledge to alter systems such as websites and apps in real time to match those inferences that we've made. So examples of this are recommender systems. This is also behavioral targeting, so personalized advertising, tailoring, personalized search. A lot of different examples of personalization can be found. And we all interact, I think, on a daily basis with personalization technology. If it's about the movies that we're watching through Netflix, the music that we're listening through on Spotify, or even our online groceries on Albert Heijn or on Amazon. I do have a twist to what I do, because I'm not only doing this from a technological perspective. I rely on a combination of psychology and applied machine learning. So if you look at all the work that I've done and all the knowledge that I've gathered in the past, that's really a mix of the man on the left, Daniel Kahneman, writer of the book Thinking Fast and Slow, a cognitive psychologist. But it's also this technology, right? The applied machine learning that the people at Netflix do. So the people that make these incredible algorithms and predictive models that, based on what you do, can predict what you might be interested in. Also add a little bit of personal information apart from my job that I very much love. I also love cycling, one of my pastimes, and I love my family, which is also something that, you know, a lot of time goes into, and I'm just as passionate about these two things as I am about my work. I do kind of want to know who you guys are as well. So normally in a face-to-face situation, you can have a quick chat. This option is not there now. So I created a small poll everywhere thing. So if I could ask you to either grab a second screen or grab your phone and go to pollev.com, enter Mark Graus 552 as a code, and start responding to my questions. And for Nicolaus, indeed, that's the Stelvio in Switzerland. It was the only time that I was looking a little bit fresh because a photographer was taking my picture while on the bike. Normally I look a bit more, less lively. So I kind of hope that people already went to the website. If not, it's still on top here. And just to get a basic idea of who I'm talking to, because I already saw the list of participants. I know some people, there's also some new names, but I just want to get an idea. What do people do? So that I can also tailor my own presentation to what your backgrounds are. And I hope that I have a complete list, but of course there are also situations that I didn't take into account. So this is also my first time using this technology, poll everywhere, and it works quite nicely, I think. A vast majority working in industry. It's also what we see, of course, in Brightlands, but some academics, some government, and some people working in neither. Just for my complete overview, people that responded, I work in neither. It's become more people as well. What would you describe your role? What are you doing in everyday life? And you can use the chat, or in this case, you can also unmute and just shout it. Good. Pensions, yeah, that's indeed semi-government, right? But that makes sense also with APG as partner in our Smart Services campus. There's also people, of course, working in pensions. Good to know. I'm going into the next question because I have some more information that I really, really need. But thanks for the overview so far. Just to get an idea, I'm talking about personalization, and it would be interesting to know how familiar you are already with this topic. So I saw two names that I know from conferences, so I expect some people to say extremely familiar. The whole session will be catering both to people that know about it and also people that are completely new to it. So there's no right or wrong answer, but just to get my idea what I can glance over and what I need to go a bit more in depth about, would be nice to have these answers. Okay, everybody is to some extent familiar. It's very nice to see. When I started my whole research, there were people that were not familiar at all. It's nice to see that it is becoming more common understanding. Finally, one question: what do you hope to get out of these sessions? And this is a text question, so just add some words. I think it should be reappearing as a word cloud, again, to get a basic idea of what you're hoping to get out of it so that I can cater to that. Knowledge and inspiration are already popping up quite, oh no, these are so many words right now. Okay, let's see. This is becoming a lot to process. Yeah. Okay, I see quite some about inspiration, knowledge, fundamental knowledge, techniques. I think that's exactly what we're also going for. Like, I won't be talking about the specific mathematics or the implementations. I will be giving an overview of what is it, how to go about it. And I hope that that will provide you a good starting point. I'll skip the next slide, and I'll go forward to the actual presentation and the introduction of the whole series. Thank you very much for your input. I will try to make use of it as good as possible. But for now, I want to explain what we're going to do in this series, because it's 3 sessions in total, out of which the third one is completely, you have to go through Peter to see if you can join that one. First 2 are completely public, and out of which today is the first one, which will serve as a basic introduction. Next week, we're talking about advanced topics. And finally, June 3rd, we will go into what we call a Techruption ideation session, in which we hope to identify possible collaborations between people and come up with some nice, cool, new state-of-the-art projects. But then for the agenda for today, we will really focus on a couple of topics. So we'll start with the introduction. What is personalization? And then, of course, we will focus a little bit on the technology. So how does it work? What main distinctions can we make? And how can we evaluate success of personalization? And I will also provide a little glimpse into the advanced topics, what are the current challenges, and what will the future bring, according to me. And that's already taking a bit of a head start towards next week. So the easiest introduction I can give to personalization is basically the tagline, one size does not fit all. Right? It's clear that different people have different needs, and you cannot rely anymore on a one size fits all approach where you design a system like a website or an app and expect that it works for everybody in the same way. The solution to this one size does not fit all, one of those solutions is personalization. And maybe to give you a concrete example of what personalization is, it's what you see when you do online shopping. So when I go to the website of Esprit to buy clothes, I see clothes that are catered to my preferences, right? Clothes that I would be willing to wear. Whereas if my wife goes to Esprit, of course, based on her past shopping behavior and past purchases, she will see completely different information. And this is really the key essence to personalization. It is giving people content or approaching people in such a way that it matches their preferences. And this is mainly made possible due to our consumer behavior, customer behavior shifting online more and more. Right? In the past, we relied on non-personalized, one-size-fits-all content, such as newspapers, television, radio, offline advertising, and also stores, shopping in stores. Due to a number of constraints, you can only do this in a one-size-fits-all approach, so you have to rely on editorial boards or on radio DJs to make sure that what these channels bring out matches the intended audience as good as possible. But nowadays, we're shifting online, so we get our news from news websites, we listen to our music and watch our videos from streaming websites. When we look at advertising, we can do this on an individually personalized, targeted level. And similar with shopping, you can really look at individual shopping behavior and cater your online stores to that individual shopping behavior. But of course, there are challenges, and it's not an easy thing to go into personalization. I hope that by the end of the session, you will at least have an idea what are the starting points, and maybe some concrete ideas on how to apply this yourselves. But to give a schematic overview of personalization, what it means. So in my eyes, personalization always comes from the interaction of a user, shown in the top left, and a system. And it can be a website or an application, can be anything that people interact with. So once this interaction starts, this results in customer behavior, interaction behavior, which we can measure or observe. And this results in data. Data that we can use through machine learning or AI in general to make deductions or inferences about customer characteristics. So based on what people look at, what they click on, what is it that they want, what is it that they need. And this knowledge can again be fed back into the original system, and we can adapt the website or system to be in line with what we inferred about our customer. So if we know that our customer is belonging to a certain type of segment, we can change the website slightly to cater to that segment. And the whole idea of this is that once we adapt the website will influence the behavior in a certain way. So visitor behavior or customer behavior will be changed in a way that we want it to change. And this can be in many different ways. For example, by providing people with movies that they're interested in, it's more likely that they will enjoy watching the movies. They will have a better customer experience or viewer experience while watching movies. These goals can also be more economical. So in an online store, if you do personalization, you can expect your revenue to go up because people find relevant content and they find it easy to purchase items. There are a couple of components to personalized systems. So from the schematic overview, we can already deduce that a host system is necessary, right? So there's a website or application that we personalize. And that's what we call the host system. There's also data. We do our personalization based on interaction behavior. So this is data that we collect on an individual customer level. And this is data that describes what do people do? What do they look at? What do they purchase? And then finally, we have the personalization system itself. And this is really the logic that infers customer characteristics on the one hand, and on the other hand, decides based on these inferences what action to take. So if we know that someone is interested in a certain product, we show him or her that product. And this is the personalization system. I did call these sessions data-driven personalization and not just personalization. So maybe to confine a little bit what I want to keep in scope and what I want to leave outside of scope. So what I do not consider data-driven personalization is a personalization such as you see in personalized emails. So if you have newsletters nowadays, it's hardly unthinkable that you don't personalize these anymore. Like Coolblue, when they send me an email, they will always address me by my first name. In the purest form of the word, this is personalization, but I do not consider this in this context as data-driven personalization. In this case, we'll be focusing on personalization that is based more on psychological characteristics, such as attitudes and beliefs, such as preferences or interests, such as people's needs. Also, to give a bit of scope to this whole talk, we definitely need some focus because it's 2 one-hour sessions. I will not be talking about the machine learning part. Looking also at the audience, focusing on algorithms and hyperparameter optimization and model selection is going to be not that interesting. Just to give you some pointers of the type of material that we will be using or that we use in personalization is things like clickstream analysis, supervised learning in itself, a form of machine learning, and reinforcement learning, which is also used quite often in this context. So if you are interested in personalization and you maybe want to start engaging with people that can help you out with that, these are some things that having a basic level of awareness about will help tremendously in communicating. But then again, you can go so deep into this and then create basically academic careers on this, so I don't want to go too much in depth in this. Let's take this as a given and focus more on the abstract level of personalization. Also, in all honesty, my research focuses for 95% on recommender systems. And recommender systems are a form of personalized systems. So as I say, all recommender systems are personalized, but not all personalized systems are recommender systems. But looking at my examples, you will notice quite some work from recommender systems. At the same time, it's important to know that the same techniques and the same concepts that play a role in recommender systems play a role in other personalized systems as well, such as personalized search, personalized ads and targeting, or real-time user segmentation. I do tend to put some academic articles here and there. I'm not sure if that's I'm not 100% sure if that's interesting, but I will explain in the basis when I do put a citation like this, what this is about. So in the context of personalization, what the paper by Motivator from 2001 wrote is based on clickstream behavior, also try and predict if people are likely to go and purchase or are just browsing, and use that information also to make adaptations to the websites. So this is slightly different from personalized systems, but here we're concretely trying to predict if people are going to purchase, yes or no, which is also something that you can use to adapt a website to influence visitor behavior. And I think going on, this is going to be the one take-home message of this session. So we will be discussing a number of techniques, and I think that this taxonomy on two factors is one of the key points. So first of all, looking at the rationale of our personalization systems, we have. I'm looking at Jeroen's message, and I'm getting slightly distracted. Yeah, the era of adaptation is where we're at. But to discuss the taxonomy of techniques used, we will be looking at two major factors. First of all is the rationale. What type of filtering do we use? What type of rationale do we use to come to our predictions and to our output? And we'll be looking at the type of feedback that we use to do our personalization on. And I think that these two distinctions really cover the majority of personalization techniques and approaches. So looking at the first distinction, the rationale behind personalization. There are two main approaches that we can take, and I'll just explain these in a bit more in depth later on. But first of all is content-based filtering. And this is really trying to infer a user's preferences or needs or what they want from product attributes of items that they like or that they have interacted with in the past. Opposed to content-based filtering is the approach of collaborative filtering. And that's basically where we try to infer what a user wants or needs from what users like them have wanted or needed in the past. And to go a bit more in depth, looking first at content-based filtering. Content-based filtering is nothing more than trying to predict relevance in terms of attributes that we have. So if we have a clothing store that sells shirts, we can see for current user, he has purchased in the past shirt 1 and shirt 2 that both have a dark color and they have a color. And now I remember this example with color and color. As a non-English native speaker, it's very difficult to make that distinction between the two. But what we can see is that there is a pattern, right, in what type of shirts this user likes. It's interested in shirt 1 and shirt 2. And then we can deduce, looking at shirt 3 and shirt 4, seeing that shirt 3 is very much different from shirt 1 and 2, whereas shirt 4 is quite similar from shirt 1 and 2. This is information that we can use to then show them shirt 4. And this is really content-based filtering, right? We're looking at the products that we have, we're looking at what attributes they have, and we look at what attributes are related to interests or preferences or relevance from a user. An alternative approach is called collaborative filtering. And collaborative filtering has to do with making use of patterns of people that are similar to each other, with the idea that people that exhibit similar behavior have similar preferences. So how that works is if we have a target user, user 1, and we know that user 1 has in the past interacted with products A, B, C, and D. What we then do is we look in our historic data. So in our historic data, we have 3 other users, user 2 that has interacted with products A, B, D, and E, user 3 that has interacted with products B, C, and G, and user 4 that has interacted with A, B, C, F, and H. So the idea is that people that interact with products, that these products are relevant to them. So what we do is then we first check to which users is user 1 the most similar. We then check what products that user 1 has interacted with and also the products that the other users have interacted with. Like what's the relationship between those, with the idea that we can find products that user 1 is most likely interested in. And we use the information about what products they have interacted with in the past to come up with a set of products they might be interested in. So in this case, because all other users have also interacted with E, F, G, and H, we can start recommending these products to our target user. And the idea with this is that since user 1 has exhibited similar behavior to 2, 3, and 4, they might also similarly be interested in products that the other users have shown interest in. So these 2 rationales are really a main distinction between our approaches in personalization. And there's advantages to both. So if we look at content-based filtering, the slightly simpler method of the 2. So this is a very transparent method. We can look at the attributes and we can explain which attributes result in recommendations or in predictions. It's easy to understand and it's quite easy to implement. But the main drawback of content-based filtering is that you need metadata. You need information describing the different products that you have. So you need someone to enter in your system the color of your shirts, whether or not they have a color. And this can be tedious. So collaborative filtering is an approach that can be used without any metadata. Only information that you need to have is pairs of users and items and how they have interacted with each other. In addition, better performance can be achieved through collaborative filtering. The drawback with collaborative filtering is that it's slightly more complicated. I see Tim asking a question about asking an individual about their preferences, if that is another rationale. This is indeed another rationale, but let me see how I approach this. The challenge is quite often that you want to do a bit more. Let me see how I approach this. If it's okay if I stick a pin in this and I come back at the end, also when we've looked at the different types of feedback, because that also relates to this point a little bit. And that's actually the main distinction, second main distinction, the type of feedback that we're looking at. And this has to do with explicit feedback and implicit feedback. So explicit feedback really is about, like Tim mentions, Titus. So explicit feedback has to do with feedback that people give explicitly. So we ask people a question and they respond to it. So this might be, are you interested in a shirt with a collar? Yes or no. Implicit feedback has to do with their interaction behavior. So what do they look at? What do they purchase? What do they put in shopping baskets? So this is really something that you can measure implicitly. So explicit feedback is something that I think we're all quite familiar with in the past. So for those of you that have been using Netflix for a longer time, you might remember the star ratings that you could give to movies that you watch. So do you like a movie or did you dislike a movie? Similar now in YouTube, you can give a thumbs up or thumbs down for movies that you like or don't like. And this is information that we can also use to make our predictions, right? If people express that they like a movie, this is information that we can use to make predictions about what other movies they might like as well. Implicit feedback has to deal with looking at what people watch, right? What they look at, what they put in their shopping baskets, what they buy, what they rent, depending on what type of domain you're working in. And this is information that we see quite often. So if you go to any type of e-commerce website, such as Amazon, or in this case, bol.com, if you go and look at a product, what you will see is quite often information such as people that looked at the product that you're looking at right now also looked at these products. So this has to do with implicit feedback based on objectively observable behavior. Also without any, and this is also indeed, as Jeroen mentioned, and also as a reaction to Titus' question, this also has to do with the fact that users don't have to put any effort into their responses. There are advantages to both. So if we look at explicit feedback, this is very controllable for the user. It's also very transparent. And nowadays, in the time of GDPR and privacy, it's very important that people are aware and have control over the information that they give. This is something that is not the case in implicit feedback. So implicit feedback by some people is also claimed to be more like spying on people, making use of information that they might not be willing to divulge. At the same time, implicit feedback has been allegedly called more reliable because this is to do with what people actually do and not what they say they are interested in. And of course, the part there is that there's no need for additional user input. So you don't give any information. You do not force the user to provide any information. And now also looking back at Titus' question, this is also looking at asking people for their actual preferences. So this would be a form of explicit feedback. And at the same time, it would be quite difficult explicit feedback. So if we look, for example, at music, asking people what their preferences are in music, this can become very hard to describe. It's easier for people to say, I like this song and I don't like that song, than saying what properties of a song makes them like it. So asking people for their preferences, in some cases it works, in some cases it doesn't work, but it's a tricky situation. Looking already forward towards next week, this does tend to be the approach that I take in my own research, where I do try to ask people to complete surveys that they can answer to link that to their preferences. So in my opinion, there should always be a mix between those two, and we should also ask to some extent about people and things related to their preferences. And looking at products versus services, also going into the question of Bernadette. So we're now indeed looking at products in the sense that we have a service in the sense of a store, and we're trying to match the service provided by that store to people's preferences. At the same time, personalization, like I mentioned in the past, I'm focusing on recommended systems a little bit, but we can personalize different aspects, right, of our services as well. So looking at the products or the projects that I'm running now, one of the things that I'm looking into personalizing is the way of communication that we do. So in the retirement domain specifically, I'm looking into, can we provide our information in such a way that people can process it more easily? So this would, in my opinion, be a possibility to personalize services so that people have a better experience with their services. I'm not 100% sure that answers your question, Bernadette. If you would like to unmute and maybe elaborate, that would be great. And otherwise,
I did unmute, so maybe I can clarify my question a little bit. I'm working at the notary organization, the Dutch notary organization, and I dive into this meeting to find out if we can learn from all these techniques and to see if we can use it for a better online experience for clients who might search for notary services. So when I look at products, the question is, how am I going to transfer all these principles to notary services?
All right. This will be a bit difficult for me to answer, thanks to my complete lack of knowledge about notary services other than them signing mortgages for me. But I think that we can, let me think about this. There are, like I mentioned, there are different ways. There are different ways. Give me 1 second. Miro, ik ben aan het werk. Nee, Miro, ik ben aan het werk. Je moet stil zijn. Okay. So yeah, the joy of COVID, right? Sorry about that. So looking at services that are provided by service providers, in either case, certain services are going to be more or less relevant to certain people, right? If someone approaches you from a professional viewpoint versus
Mark, you're frozen.
am I unfrozen?
You're back, yes.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Doing good. I'm doing good. It's going good.
I got yeah. It's a poor timing with my son coming in and a bad network quality pop up, but it happens. Okay. So yeah, to recap, I don't know when I dropped out. So what I would argue is that we can personalize in two different ways. So we can personalize in the sense that we can already make a pre-selection about what services people might be willing to take from a service provider. And we can also look at the way that we provide these services. So for example, taking a more formal approach versus more informal approach, or taking a more, how you call it, keeping people informed along the way, or just giving people the end result. There are different aspects to, I imagine, any type of service that we provide. I don't know enough, I think, about this specific situation to give concrete results, but I'm more than willing to discuss this and see what we can find out as relevant ways to make personalization, to leverage the power of personalization. I see you looking a little bit skeptically, Bernadette. Is this something that I completely missed the point, or does this?
No, I'm just thinking, and probably this looks skeptical, but it's not what I meant to express. I think you're right in your answer. You want to find out what triggers people, so you provide them with a kind of logical set of services. But the origin of my question is also has to do with, we want to find out where we probably miss things. So this is what interests me, but it's probably something we should dive into apart from this presentation.
It's yeah. Let's take this offline. I think it is also what you are expressing now about what people might be missing. That's something that triggers me immediately, because the whole idea with this data-driven personalization, it's always focusing on what we can observe. And quite often we cannot harness what we do not observe, right? So we never know why people do not interact with a certain product, or why do not take a certain service if they do not take it. So would be interesting to see to what extent we can use the same techniques also to investigate what maybe are points for improvement. Where are we missing like results and positive results?
Okay. Well, thank you so far.
You're welcome. Thanks for your question. I'm going to move on to the advantage of both explicit feedback and implicit feedback, because we have 20 minutes left. This is my first time doing it online like this, and I see already that pacing is becoming a bit of a challenge. So I basically gave a small taxonomy of the techniques, right, that we discussed. So we have our explicit and implicit feedback. So what type of information do we use? And we have a rationale, content-based filtering, making use of patterns between people versus collaborative filtering. Content-based making use of attributes versus collaborative filtering, making use of similarity in behavior. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both, and what is right really depends on several factors, such as the data that you have, how much data you can collect, and also what customers want or expect. And maybe also to look at Jorg's question, does implicit feedback generate more reliable information? So this is a tricky part. I'm also not 100% sure that this is really settled, this question, but in principle what people think is that because we're looking at actual behavior, this is it's less easy for visitors or customers or users to manipulate this information. Whereas if you ask people what they like, so again going at the movie domain, at Netflix, everybody says that they like documentaries, but in the end everybody watches slapstick comedies. So there's always a mismatch between what people like and what they say they like. And this mismatch is something that has allegedly been causing explicit feedback to be less reliable. I'm not convinced, and this is also why I try to combine always explicit and implicit feedback in my research to also get to an idea of what helps. I'm going to postpone Hannes' questions about ethical considerations concerning explicit and implicit feedback also to next week a little bit, where we'll also be discussing the ethical challenges that come to personalization. But indeed, there is some differences. In the case of explicit feedback, people are actually aware of the fact that they're divulging information, and in implicit feedback, this is not the case. And apart from ethical considerations, this has also been shown to cause some negative customer experience. If they feel spied upon, research has shown that causes them also to be less satisfied and more skeptical towards websites and service providers. I will answer Roy's question in the end, as he mentioned. And I will go into the next part, evaluation, because this is another important part when it comes to personalization. And it's really about how to assess how well your system is doing. And to kind of give an idea, there are three main approaches. There's offline evaluation, which is basically trying to answer the question, how well does my model make predictions? There's online evaluation, how do my predictions and how does my system influence customer interaction or customer behavior? And we can go into user studies. And this is really about both how well does my model predict, also how do my predictions influence customer interactions, but it also allows you to collect more information about why is this the case through observational or more qualitative research approaches. We'll be focusing today a little bit more on offline and online, and user studies is really part for the advanced topics of next week. This also has to do with which one is easiest to do. So if you go from right to left, offline evaluation is really the easiest to do in the sense that you need the least resources to do this, and also the approach is most straightforward. But the reliability and the depth of the insights, of course, goes up if you go from offline to online to user studies in the end. So maybe to get to an idea, because we are evaluating success, we have to acknowledge that there are 4 levels of goals. So we want to have a personalization system with good model properties, such as the performance of the models that we use. We also need to have good user outcomes. To what extent does the system help the user or influence user behavior? We can also look at leading indicators, right? To what extent does a system influence the way people view a website or a system or a provider? And also there's, in the end, organizational objectives. We want to make sure that our personalization increases some key performance indicators, such as revenues or sales. And which method to use depends on what you want to find out. So if you want to do offline evaluation, the only thing that you can answer through offline evaluations are model properties. To what extent can I make good predictions? Now, if you want to look at to what extent do these predictions also influence user behavior, then we go to online studies. And if we go into user studies, we can actually also ask people, what are the leading indicators? Like, how do you feel about what we're doing in terms of personalization? So organizational, it becomes quite difficult depending on what level you look at. So that's also the scope that we're going to stay away from a little bit during these sessions. But starting with the first offline evaluation, like I mentioned, the most simple way to do this is really how we assess model performance using only historical data that we have. So if we have, for example, this data set of 7 visits that have been made in the past, where we have several attributes, such as what is the source of our visitor, how did they come into contact with our system? Is that through directly going through it, or is that by using search, or have they been referred by social media? At what day of the week do they come to our website? This might be information also that relates to whether or not they're more likely to purchase. We can have a whole lot of these types of features that we can use for information. But in the end, what we're trying to do is go to the rightmost column and try to see if people purchase yes or no. So what we do in offline evaluation is basically we take our entire bunch of data, so these 7 visits, and we randomly split them into 2 parts. And we use a train part and a test part. So we use part of the data to train a model, and then we test that model on the part that we designate test. So how does this work? Like I said, I will not be going too much into what algorithms we use and what the machine learning part. But in principle, what we can do is we apply supervised learning and we build a predictive model on our trained data. And what this model can do is basically take our test data, right, where we have all these features from our data set already. We can, for the test set, these 2 visits that we have, we can feed them into the predictive model, and this predictive model makes a prediction whether or not people will purchase. And then we compare the predictions against the observed values. So we see that in the history, in our original training data, no one made a purchase, and we see that our predictions for visit 6, a purchase was predicted to be made. So we know that in this case, our model doesn't work so well. And this is a really easy way of looking at it. But of course, machine learners go a bit more in depth and they look at different types of metrics. Before we go into the different metrics, one problem with this train test split, where you make one random split, is that you can have a very lucky or unlucky split. So you split in such a way that your data or your results are more positive or more negative than they really are. So one way to do that is to do k-fold cross-validation, and this is really the most in-depth machine learning that we'll go into. And what we basically do in k-fold cross-validation is we split our data set not into a training and a test split, but we split it into k bins. So in this case, we look at 5 different parts and we run our model 5 times. So in the first run, we take the first 4 bins as training and the 5th bin as test data set. And we do the same as we did in our previous example. Then we do a second run where we take the first 3 and the 5th bin as training set and the 4th bin as test data set, and we do the same thing. And so on and so on. And now we take the average of these 5 runs, and this is a way more accurate indicator of performance. So there are different ways of measuring performance. And this really depends also on what you're trying to model and what you're trying to predict. So in this example of explicit feedback, when we're looking at predicting ratings that people have given to movies, there are different ways of looking at this. And this all has to do with what is the rating that we have observed, what is in our historical data, and what have we predicted. And what's the difference between those two? With the idea that bigger differences is bad, smaller differences is what we want. Now, if we look at products, quite often we're not interested in ratings themselves, but we're interested in, is a product relevant, yes or no? So did they purchase it in the end, yes or no? And there we have to do with what we call classification and the difference between what we observe and what we predict, where we can make the distinction between what a true positive is. So we predict something to be relevant and it was indeed relevant. We also want true negatives. We predict something to be irrelevant and they're also irrelevant from our data. And then there's mistakes or errors that we have. So false positive or false negative, where something was predicted to be relevant, but it was irrelevant, or something was predicted to be irrelevant, but it was in the end relevant. I'll go into a little bit more in depth about the classification part, because that one is quite interesting in itself. Finally, what we're looking at more and more now is not so much the rating prediction or classification, but we're looking at ranking. So we're trying to sort our services or things from most relevant to least relevant. And what we do is we check if our ranking corresponds to what we have seen in the past. And the better the correspondence is, the better our model predicts. So looking at this relevance prediction, because I think that's most interesting to illustrate the point that it's very important to think about what metric you are using to compare your systems. Is it better to guarantee, for example, true positives at the cost of many false positives? Or do we want to minimize false positives at the cost of maybe missing out on true positives? So this really depends on where you're doing your personalization. If you're personalizing in a search engine, it's quite okay if there's a lot of false positives, as long as that one true positive is in there. Similar with e-commerce recommendations, or maybe opposed with e-commerce recommendations, kind of depends. It might be more problematic if you have false positives. For example, in e-commerce recommendations, if you show all kinds of irrelevant options, this might distract people from the relevant option. So in that case, you might want to optimize a little bit more for true positives and minimize false positives. So this is kind of also the art of personalization, maybe machine learning and data science in itself, right? So how do you express a success factor? So to summarize this, it's really important to be conscious of what you're trying to evaluate, right? And this decides how you stratify, right? How do we split our test and train data sets? And also what evaluation metric do we use? What do we consider good model performance? So online evaluation is really about the idea of we have a system and we check if the system improves, in this case, conversion. So that means that we have our website. 50% that comes to our website gets the original website. 50% of visitors that come to our website gets the website with our personalization technology. And we see which of these versions yields the highest conversion. So the proportion of, or the version where conversion is highest, or where most purchases are made, naturally is more in line with the business goals or objectives that we're trying to achieve. Now, there are challenges to this A/B testing or online evaluation. And the main challenge of that is that you actually need a system, right? In order to be able to split your population or your visitors over two versions means that you actually need a version with a system. So that's more of a technical challenge. But of course, there's also methodological challenges to this. So what you really need to do is you need to define your success metric or your key performance indicator. And this is actually the most challenging part about A/B testing. So if we're looking at revenue, it might seem straightforward. Higher revenue is better. But quite often, revenue in itself is not the only thing that you're looking at. Does it make sense if revenue goes up only in the short term, whereas in the long term, we see that it fades out? Are we interested in revenue per visit or revenue per visitor? Is it better if people make one big purchase versus numerous smaller purchases? So defining what your key performance indicator is, how are you going to be evaluating your success, is quite a challenge. And one final thing is that it's difficult to measure the long-term effects through A/B testing. So indeed, we might see that during our A/B test, a certain variant or certain version performs better than the other, but it doesn't guarantee that this is also going to be the case over the longer term. To give a bit more information in the challenging parts, a lot of research that I use whenever I run A/B tests with companies or for my own research, I try to stick to these pointers. I at least run my A/B tests for 2 weeks. That ensures that there's no weekly patterns or no weird outliers that influence the findings. I try to run AA tests. So an AA test is an A/B test where both variants are supposedly, they should be the same. But we quite often see that if we run an AA test that we still find some differences between those, which can be an indication that there's something in terms of technology going on or something else is going on, but AA tests are a way to ensure that you are running things reliably. And finally, ramping up the treatment conditions, so the variant with the personalization technology, because we're always launching something new into the world and we're not sure how it's going to perform. So what we do is we ramp it up and we keep on checking how it works. So if the new functionality that we're releasing shows something to be doing something wrong, we can immediately pull the plug and we can go back to the old system. So finally, looking at user studies, because we can see that A/B tests and online evaluation, what effect they have on user behavior, but we can use studies to also get information about why this is the case. So in a user study, we have actual users interact and give feedback on the system. So this can be done qualitatively through think aloud or observation, sitting next to people actually using the system and asking what they're doing. Or we can do this more quantitatively through surveys by asking them how they experience using the system. So this is going to be topic of next week, because this is what I always do. I always run user studies combined with surveys. And we do see that behavior, while behavior might not be influenced, user experience might be influenced, and vice versa. So there's, it's interesting. It provides additional insights. So maybe to look at evaluation in a nutshell, it's really important to know that the type of objective that you're trying to optimize for defines what type of evaluation you want to do. And objectives and systems also define how to evaluate which performance metrics or KPI or aspects of user experience. So finally, to wrap up, maybe what is a roadmap to get started with personalization? So it really starts with inventorization, getting an idea of what data we have, or starting data collection as part of design, the modeling and offline evaluations of our predictive models and our systems, and also demonstrating that we can make accurate predictions actually. Finally, implementations. So we have predictive models and we link them to our host system, and we make sure that our predictive model makes sure that there's adaptations on our system. And we start running A/B tests to also show that it works. And in the end, we do our monitoring and we keep ensuring that the systems keep on operating, and we collect additional feedback to also feedback into our predictive models to improve them over time. So you can take some of these steps in the homework that I've prepared, where you can become a data scientist. I'll make sure to upload the links and the slides later on. But basically, I've created a dashboard where you can do the things that we discussed, model comparison, model optimization, and also play around with personal recommendations. Sneak preview into next week, and I noticed that I'm rushing a little bit, but we're going to be looking at challenges and future directions. There are some quite big challenges in terms of regulations, but also ethical awareness. People are becoming more conscious of this technology and these algorithms around us, and this influences what we can and cannot do. And when we look at the future of personalization, also in line with these challenges, I will explain my own research line and also explain my approach to personalization. So to wrap up, finally, what we've learned is what kind of personalization works for you depends on what data you have, what you want to achieve, and also the type of business you're in. And how you need to evaluate your system depends similarly on what you want to achieve. I hope I gave a little bit of an overview and gave you some starting points, maybe to also illustrate my approach or the approach of the Biz Research Institute. We can help out with any stage in this whole roadmap. But in all honesty, we are scientists. We want to push the state of the art. So as soon as we can do something novel and new, such as incorporating customer knowledge that you might have, making use of novel data sources and validating through user studies and user experiments, that's really interesting to us, and we'll be more than happy to talk. For all the people that are leaving, thank you. All the people that want to stay a little bit around to have some questions also, thank you. I hope that you join me next week. Look forward to seeing you. And of course, if you cannot make it, I have my contact information, and we can discuss in Teams a little bit more for those interested. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Good to hear. Thank you. I'll try to pace myself a bit differently next week, because this not face-to-face, it makes things a bit tricky.
It's experimenting, validating, and improving.
Right, this is all online evaluation, and I'll ask you for feedback and make it a small user study later on.
Cool. Mark, also me, I have to leave into my next call. So up to you to take a few more questions, but I will log off and see you next Tuesday, hopefully. Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
See you next time. Thanks.